Hello everyone, Zeno What If here. Those that are new to the channel, subscribe to see some of the content I made. Leave a comment down below for any ideas. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. Link down in the description of the fanfiction of this, What If. To bring in part 23 of What If the Gate appeared in G.I. Joe. Chapter 44, Drums of War. When Centurion and his entourage returned from United States to Alnus, there was many changes that happened in town. Several stores were closed, while in their places were registration offices for the new migrants. At the outside of the Fort Ginza, there was numerous civilian trucks, gathered to proceed to designated areas. Many former inhabitants of Alnustown has gathered for registrations, during which they tell a lot about their family's whereabouts. Fort Ginza was also in a buzz of activity. Numerous addition troops have arrived from outside of the gate to participate in final battle against Zorzal's regime. On the airfield of the base, there was a lot of combat aircrafts, as well several civilian aircrafts in UN emblems on them, who was ready to proceed to the areas which were too far from normal reach. In the Commonwealth of Independent Kingdoms, everything was also getting ready for war, as well for the migration to the world outside the gate. King Duran once again was getting ready to lead his own army against the foe he hated most. For him, Zorzal was far worse than Molt. Duran was fully aware of Zorzal's sexual assaults on women, and he knows about those women, who were taken to his palace and never seen back alive. Such disgusting man has no rights to walk free on earth. With those thoughts in mind, he walked outside his Aventon palace and get on his warhorse. Move out, he ordered, we're marching towards Italica. It's time to finally pay back the Empire for everything evil they've done to us. And even despite that this is our last battle as the citizens of Elb, we shall not allow the name of our kingdom be tarnished in shame. If we leave this world, we shall leave as honorable warriors, worthy of the kingdom of Emroy. Long live King Duran, the Lion of Elb, shouted the warriors, long live Kingdom of Elb. Death to the Empire. And with that, the soldiers of Kingdom of Elb were marching before King Duran. Duran was looking proudly at his soldiers. During the time he had since the Aventon conference, he vastly improved his army with the help from the other worlders. Now, the soldiers of the Elb Kingdom were all dressed in similar camouflage tarped armor, which allowed them to blend in perfectly with the terrain of Falmart. They've also been mostly armed with crossbows instead of spears, and several of them were carrying new type of weapons, made by the other worlders' armorers. A modern version of Chinese Kai Ko Nu repetitive crossbow, which allowed to fire the arrows much faster than the usual crossbows. The Dark Elves have also mobilized their forces. More than 20,000 elves joined the call to finally strike back against the Empire. Many elves were now armed with compound bows, shipped from the outside of the gate and replacing their older bows, which allowed them to fire arrows with more power. They've also been armed with short swords and Panzerfaust 3 rocket launchers. In Italica, Princess Pina's knights have finished their training with the help from Sergeant Slaughter. They were now armed not just with vibro swords, but also with the German-made G36 assault rifle. This weapon allowed the knights to engage the enemy in long range instead of using their spears. Tyul, for her part, didn't waste any time as well. She reorganized the remaining warrior bunnies, forming a sizable battalion with Delilah as her second in command. They were all armed not just with bows and arrows, but also with Nepalese kukri knives and German MP7 SMGs. Their job was been to conduct recon and communications duties, thus providing the combined forces with the information they need. Other demahumans also mobilized their forces. Dwarves, Leonoids, Catmen, Elves, Volradens and others, all of them sended their forces to form the multi-raced Falmart Liberation Army. Back at the Alnus, Lele were also busy. With the help of Perceptor and Tony Stark, she has modernized Rory's halberd, allowing it to change shape and become a machine gun, thus allowing Rory to fight her enemies on range combat instead of just charging at them. Giselle's side was also been modernized, allowing it to transform into a rifle. This has allowed Giselle to finally join combat with Rory as her partner. And finally, Lele has created the XMBR-1 experimental magic beam rifle. This weapon utilizes both principles of magic and earth weapons, which only the magical users can use the weapon's full potential. It fires standard 56x45 rounds, however, it can also concentrate magical energy power into one blast. By using it on the testing ground, Lele's shot has pierced 2 armored steel plates, stunning not just the ANF military, but also scaring Rory, who saw the power of Lele's creation, which was also been shifted to Dark Elves, as well to Tuca and Yao. At the Italica, the members of the ANF Florida have gathered for final briefing. Centurion has walked into it by presenting the plan of their campaign. "Gentlemen," he said, "the moment we've been all waiting for has arrived. We are going to Sidera. According to our information, Zorzel has also moved his forces towards Sidera, meaning that the final battle is now at hand. Our mission is to capture the Sidera, so that the UN forces will be able to conduct their evacuation procedures. This will be a long and hard battle. The enemy knows we're coming, but he doesn't know how we'll attack. It is therefore, we've devised the plans of the operation codenamed Scipio, which will require the cooperation of all our forces, both from ANF and Florida." He then walked to the screen, which was placed at the wall, and flipped the switch, showing the plan of the operation. Many of the nobles were stunned to see a magical picture, which showed them the details of their advance. "As you can see," said Centurion, "I've decided to utilize for our advance one of the concepts we've learned from our world's history. In about year 1935 in the country called Spain, there was a civil war, similar to ours. The commander of the Falang forces General Franco was about to advance on the capital of Spain, the city of Madrid. Franco has proposed to march in 4 columns, but he also mentioned that there will be a 5th column inside the Madrid, which will strike at his opponent's backs. I've decided to use similar tactics, but in my own way. Our forces will advance to Sidera in 4 columns. 2 of them will come from Italica on the ground. They will be our main strike forces that will push the enemy towards Sidera. When we have the city in sight, the remaining 3 other columns will strike. The 3rd will attack the city from the air, which will take the necessary strategical ground at the ruins of Jade Palace. The 4th column will strike the enemy from the river, taking all its routes and blocking their chances of escape. And finally, the 5th column will attack from within the city, striking at the enemy guards at the gates and allowing our forces to take the city. Our main goal will be to capture Zorzel and the pro-war senators, who are now considered as wanted criminals. They must be captured to face trial for their crimes in our world. If they can't be captured, they must be terminated with extreme prejudice. Such harsh orders you issues, Sir Prime, said Duke Leo, are you sure that this is wise? Yes, Duke Leo, answered Centurion, because we don't have times for being sentimental. We must destroy Zorzel's forces, so that the operation, Exodus, would proceed according to plan. That is why we don't have time to play any games. The fate of the entire population of Falmart is in our hands, and we must do everything to save it. Yes, Sir Prime, answered Leo, I understand. Now then, said Centurion, according to our intelligence, the best way to stop us for Zorzel will be in 2 places. First, in the Duma Mountains, where there are several fortresses located. The intelligence has reported that there are a lot of enemy troops stationed at those fortresses, guarding to pass through the mountains. Those fortresses must be taken to allow our troops to proceed to Sidera. Second, the enemy could stage an ambush in the Mare forests and mountains. That sounds like a Hurtgen's forest massive to me, sir, snorted Colonel Emerson. I don't know about you, but I don't like to have my men been ambushed in that forest, thus creating another, bloody bucket division. Me either, Colonel, answered Centurion, which is why we gonna bomb that forest and those mountains with our vacuum bombs. You're gonna destroy the Mare forests, gasped Hamilton. We don't have much of a choice, answered Centurion, we must proceed to the capital as fast as we can, so we cannot be delayed by the ambushes. Plus, in case you've forgotten, Miss Hamilton, that place will be already smothered by the apocryph, so it's doomed anyway. Do not worry, said Lysina, Wereharen fully understand the sacrifice she must made to save other lives in forest. She only requests that you save all other creatures in that forest. Why won't you take care of that, Miss Lysina, smiled Centurion, after all, you are the apostle of Wereharen. The others also chuckled a little bit. Now then, said Centurion, once the Mare obstacle will pass, our forces will have all clear in order to reach the capital. However, Zorzel might also prepare an ambush at the hills nearby Sidera, as well reinforce it with his forces. Once we take them down, the Sidera will be ours. Get ready, barked Sergeant. Slaughter, repel. Go, go, go. Get the lead out. The soldiers were climbing down the ropes from the towers. Come on, faster, faster, bellowed Slaughter. Get going, we don't have all day. Move, 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 move. Why can't they let us do it? Grumbled the cat man, we can scale that rope much faster. Because you guys are our recon teams, answered U.S. Marine Sergeant. Now, get back to your drills. Break time is over. Move it. Soon, a helicopter appeared with several soldiers in it. That's our siege plan, asked the Elban commander, without a siege tower. That's right, answered the Japanese lieutenant. It's based on using the same tactics as our assault teams use, when they rescue the hostages, by climbing down from the helicopters to the roof and then attack the building from above to the ground level. That's incredible, said the Elban commander. We never tried to use this with the wyverns. Wyverns are just beasts with vicious attitude, answered the Japanese commander. Besides, they don't have enough space to place on them more soldiers. Back at Telta, Zorzel was incredibly furious. So far, all his plans were nothing more than a failure. What's worse, because of the other worlders declared peace between the Empire and ANF, many of the soldiers were complaining, wanting to quit the army. Only the brutal methods of the Scorchiers, like decimations, has allowed to keep the army intacted, yet those tactics had their limits. If Zorzel continued to have more failures, soon the army will rebel against him and the Hawks. Damn it, he cursed, those blasted vassals has ganged up on me. Why didn't father destroy them much sooner? Now, they've joined the barbarians in attempt to burn Sidera to the ground. Curse that Duran, the two-headed snake. Well, we're not gonna wait until they've reached Sidera. We shall make our own strike right now. Summon Legate Scharnhorst. It's time for the 11th Dragon Corps, Basilisk, to make his move. We shall strike the rebels and the barbarians so hard, they'll know the true terror of the Empire. I want Italica burned to the ground. Back at the Alnus, the people were continued their registrations, when suddenly, the midday air was suddenly pierced by the sound of an ominous, yet familiar wail. A mournful wail that seemingly got louder and louder the longer it continued. Attention! Attention! Colonel Mihara's voice suddenly boomed through the town's speaker system. All residents and personnel are ordered to evacuate toward the closest emergency bunker immediately. Repeat, all residents and personnel are ordered to evacuate toward the closest emergency bunker immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. We need to get to safety, said the UN inspector at the registration office, as he began to quickly lead others towards a nearby bunker. But it was very clear to see that the normally emotionless man was quite worried about the developing situation. It was a scene that was being played out all over Alnistown, as people dropped whatever it was they were doing, ran towards one of the many bunkers, shelters that had been built over the last few months. Mothers grabbed their children, while fathers gathered their families and led them to safety. All the while the air raid siren continued to wail its mournful song in an attempt to warn the residents of Alnistown that an attack was coming. But while Alnistown and its people prepared for the worst, Fort Ginza was getting itself ready to meet the new threat head-on, as anti-air units were activated and waited for the attack to arrive. Attention! Attention! Boomed the voice over the loudspeakers, all air defense personnel to your stations. I repeat, all air defense personnel to your stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Oh, the outskirts of Alnistown, elements of the U.S. 5th Air Defense Artillery Regiment activated their network of C-RAM emplacements that were dotted around the settlement. While elements of the PLA 1st Air Defense Artillery Brigade activated their ATA elements and JSDF 2nd Air Defense Missile Group activated their American-supplied MIM-104 inches Patriot surface-to-air missile batteries that had been brought through weeks earlier just for this sort of scenario, while nearby, Russian 75th Anti-Air Missile Regiment activated their newly developed S-400, which was been stationed in Alnis's Russian forces' spare ace in the hole, just in case if things get really hairy. Attention! Attention! Boomed voice over the loudspeakers at Alnis Airfield, all pilots, to your planes. Repeat, all pilots, to your planes. Large enemy group of wyverns are approaching from the north to Italica. All fighters, scramble, repeat, all fighters, scramble. At Alnis Field every single combat aircraft, From F-18s to even AH-64s were being armed with whatever air-to-air missiles they had available to them, while those unable to take part in air-to-air combat were wheeled into their hangars and secured. Japanese Type 87 anti-aircraft artillery patrolled the air base itself, as the first jets thundered into the sky at an impressive speed. Within the command control center, General Hazama and the rest of the ANF leaders monitored the situation as it developed. Lancaster, the E-2D Hawkeye aircraft, was able to avoid the oncoming horde of Imperial dragons by simply gaining altitude on the winged creatures and their riders. An altitude that would have killed any living creature who did not have the advantage of being sealed in a pressurized airframe, like Lancaster's crew. Confirmation about the identity of the attacking force came from observers at Fob Kisaradu, just outside the Duma Mountains, who reported the massive formations appeared nearby the mountains from the north. Though small compared to what the Empire could normally field, the force of over 300 dragons of various types and sizes was still a formidable force in its own right. On the LED screen displayed before them, the ANF officers watch as the last flight of aircraft screamed into the sky. F-18s, armed to the teeth with air-to-air missiles and a single gun pod mounted under the advanced airframe, heading towards the one city that laid between the approaching force and Alnus Hill itself, Italica. "What's going on?" asked Centurion, as he and other gathered ANF and Florida commanders were hearing the sirens. "Sir, reports came from our spotters," answered the Japanese soldier. "A large group of enemy wyverns has been detected at the Duma Mountains, heading towards Italica." "It's the Basilisk," said Pina, looking worried. "Zorzel must be sending his forces to strike at the Florida, before we can make our move." "So, the rat thinks, he can wipe us out, snarled Duran. "Well, he's in for a big surprise. If those Imperials wanna fight, let's give them one." "Yeah," roared others, raising their hands, to arms. "Miss Kane, get Countess Mayui, the envoys, apostles and the ambassadors to the basement," barked Centurion. "The rest of you, arm up and get ready for battle. Let's greet Zorzel's forces with a proper welcome." "Yeah," roared others, "death to Zorzel. Let's get him." They all stormed out of the room to others' rooms, putting on their armor and preparing weapons. Just like in Alnistown, the citizens of the walled city had been alerted by the coalition about the approaching dragon force and had been told to seek shelter. But unlike Alnistown and Fort Ginza, Italica did not have the same level of protection the other world or fortress had. The mostly compact layout of Italica made it impossible to deploy most of the coalition's equipment throughout the city. This included most air defense systems, but that did not mean Italica and its people were helpless. One would have to look on top the walls that surrounded the city to see the numerous M163 Vulcan air defense systems manned by PLA soldiers. Several Israeli and Spider surface-to-air missile batteries had also been deployed in areas of Italica that were large enough to allow the establishment of such emplacements. The Israeli-designed missiles launchers and their Indian crews were complemented by a pair of Russian-made S-300 missile batteries located in Camp Formal itself, just 1 mile away from the city itself. The Indian missile batteries were complemented by C-RAM batteries being fielded by the Americans and were all being coordinated by radar truck. The Italica Constabulary and a contingent of UN peacekeepers assisted in helping the population reach the many cellars and food vaults that had been converted into shelters, while Countess Mayui herself and her maid's bodyguards were secured in the formal mansion and being protected by a joint Japanese-US force. Back at the mansion, Centurion and other commanders came out of the rooms, all dressed in their armor. "Pina," said Centurion, "I want you and your knights to act as our mobile force. Have your roses scattered around the city, just in case if those wyverns might carried some passengers." "That is quite possible," said Pina. "Basilisk has also the Valkyries, the best soldiers been trained by the Empire, equipped with the best armor and weapons they have. Then your job will be to track down those Valkyries and eliminate them," said Centurion. "Duran, you and your archers get on the walls and help our air defense. Remember, target only the riders, not the wyverns." "Aye," said Duran. "Good thinking, Sir Prime. I'll give them what for." "Wolf," said Centurion, turning to Volraiden's commander and other beastmen, "You, Tyul, Yaren and Noma are acting as our trackers. If those Imperials landed in the city, track them down and eliminate them." "Consider those Imperials dead," Volraiden growled in anticipation of a fight. Naren, said Centurion, turning to the elf commander, you and your archers join King Duran and help them fight the wyverns. Torrig and the dwarves will act as our damage control teams, Peregrine and the hobbits will help those who might get hurt by the enemy. I'll stay here and coordinate the battle from the roof. That is all, everyone, to your stations. He then went to the doors leading to the roof, while others stormed out of the mansion. Champagne, yelled Pina, getting on her horse, you and Blue Rose stay here and protect the palace. The rest of you, follow me. Hiya. She set her horse into full gallop, following by other roses. Inside one of the shipping containers that had been converted into a command and control unit, Major Payne and Lieutenant Colonel Joyce communicated with Fort Ginza about their situation. Joyce and Payne were glad to hear that air support was on its way, but would not be there for another 30 minutes, while the Imperials would be there in less than 15. Sir, sea rams are operational and are detecting targets, and Soldier informed the Marine. They will be in range in 10 minutes. Sir, Captain Sunil is reporting all spider batteries have been activated, another called out from her seat. Sir, call. Kino is reporting Countess Mayui is secured and that she and her maids are wishing us luck. We don't need luck, we just need our units to do their job. Joyce answered to the operator, as the Marine commander watched the advancing force on the LED screen before him. Contact call. Sunil and inform him that his S-300s have authorization to engage hostiles once they are in range. Let's see if we can't rattle some nerves before our guest arrive. It did not take long for Payne's orders to reach the Indian officer in his command vehicle, a predatory smile forming on his lips as he heard those words. Tayyar Tayyub Ekk Madhyam Se Char. The Indian officer ordered, as he could see the large force enter into range of the 9M96E2 missiles currently being held within each launcher. Launch. From within the safety of the formal palace, Persia looked on in wide-eye awe as the other worlders used their terrible weapons against the Empire. As the Catwoman could see streaks of white smoke and flame erupt from Camp Formal and fly off into the sky at frightening speeds. There were only 4 in total, but the maid knew better than to question the power of the other worlders. Meanwhile, less than 30 kilometers away, the vanguard of the 11th Dragon Corps of the Imperial Army flew confidently towards their objectives. Basilisk represented the cream of the Imperial Army's Dragon's Corps and were some of the more die-hard members of the Imperial Army. Just like Zorzel and their commanding officer, the men of Basilisk felt betrayed by the Emperor's decision to surrender to the barbarians from across the gate. They needed to avenge their fallen comrades, now bow down to their killers and admit defeat. This was the ultimate insult to not only them, but their fallen brothers in arms who had died trying to retake Alnus Hill. The Emperor and their leaders had failed them all, but now they had a change at repaying the other worlders in blood. Today, the Empire would finally have its revenge and make the other worlders pay for their mistake once and for all. The new Empire under Zorzel will succeed where Mold had failed and Basilisk would lead that charge towards ultimate victory. But just as the first wave caught sight of Italica in the distance, the lead dragons and their riders were suddenly consumed in massive balls of fire, complements of the Indian Army S-300 missile battery in Camp Formal. The resulting shock waves caused by the explosions managed to knock a number of riders off their steeds and sending them falling to earth along with their now confused beasts. But before anyone could even determine just what was going on or even think to mount a proper defense, 4 more 9M96E2 missiles found their marks and decimated more of the Imperial ranks. Yet despite the carnage, Basilisk continued to press forward to Italica and their objective. They had faced way worse in their long history and still come out victorious in battle. This would be no different as Basilisk never ran away from a fight after all. But as the Imperial force approached the city-state, Basilisk were completely unaware that they were now entering a kill zone. For while they approached the city, they were completely aware of the nasty surprise the ANF had in store for them. For no sooner had the dragon force passed the tree line and into the open fields surrounding the walled city, 12 ZSU-23 4 Shilka self-propelled anti-aircraft tanks of the Vietnamese People's Army emerged from their hiding spots within the forest and activated their radar systems, actively tracking Basilisk. The Shilkas had been deployed to Italica ever since the city broke away from the Empire and had been stationed there just in case of situations like this. The 11th Dragon Corps never knew what hit them, as the Vietnamese AW guns opened up on the Dragon Riders from the rear, with a fury not seen since the First Battle of Alness Hill, while in front of them, the American Sea-Ram systems located in Camp Formel opened up on the approaching force with deadly accuracy. Sea-Ram was originally designed to intercept and eliminate enemy rockets and/or mortar shells launched against American bases. Now they were being used to great effect against large, slow-moving dragons and their riders, ripping both man and beast apart in terrible fashion. With the Chinese VADs firing from the city walls and the occasional Spider missile launch, as well several manpads launched from the ANF soldiers on the walls, combined with the arrows fired from the Elben crossbowmen and Elven archers, and it was clear to see that Basilisk was doomed. It was an absolute bloodbath for the Imperial Dragon Corps, as both man and beast were quite literally ripped to shreds by a combination of 20mm high explosive incendiary tracer, self-destruct ammunition from the American Sea-Rams, Manpad's missiles, the Vietnamese auto-cannons, all of whom were directed by powerful radar systems and found their targets with ease, and Elven and Elben arrows. Yet despite the carnage taking place, a number of dragons were able to escape the kill box and approach Italica itself. Some of whom carried large baskets that held Imperial soldiers in full battle armor. Basilisk wasn't just made up of dragon riders, as they also contained Valkyrie units, who were deployed as ground units alongside the Dragon Corps. These were units that were usually equipped with the best armor and weapons the Empire had to offer and were nigh unstoppable when in combat, the Imperial Airborne Infantry. But this aura of invincibility was quickly destroyed, as they came into range of the Chinese VADs units stationed on the city walls and paid a heavy price for their hubris. To make matter worse, two figures appeared from the city, a dragon girl with a scythe, carrying the black-clothed girl, carrying a large halberd. The Imperials were shocked to recognize Rory Mercury and Giselle, as the Apostle of Emroy leapt onto the wyverns and start killing them by hacking off their heads. She darted through the sky like a red dart, while laughing madly. At the same time Giselle was doing the same with her scythe. With two apostles versus the Imperials, it was obvious that the chances of Basilisk to succeed in their mission was doomed to failure. But by some miracle, several of the larger dragons carrying infantry unties were able to avoid being torn apart long enough to make it into the city and drop their embarked troops near the formal palace. Despite their heavy losses, the Valkyries still had their objective to complete. Their primary target was Countess Mayui. Child or not, she insulted the Empire by willingly siding with the other worlders and breaking her family's oath to the Satyran Empire. That was a crime punishable by death, and in Emperor Zorzal's new empire, Countess Mayui would not be spared from his wrath. She needed to die so as to send a message to other cities' vassals who wanted to break away from the enlightened rule of Sidera and its new ruler. But no sooner that they begun their ground advance on the formal home, the Imperial infantry men heard a chorus of men, chanting, Jai Ma Kali, Aogar Kali. To their horror, the Imperial soldiers found themselves surrounded by Indian Gorkha units and even a group of Taiul's warrior bunnies, who had also been stationed near Countess Mayui's home. The Indian bunny force made short work of the now surprised Satyran units, their battle rifles and SMGs unleashing death upon the supposed Imperial elites, while some of the Indian Gorkhas and warrior bunnies made good use of their kukris, allowing them the honor of tasting Imperial blood. In other sections of the city, several Imperials encountered Volraidens, who quickly slaughtered the enemy with their swords, while others meet their doom from Rose Knight's G36 rifle fire, who used them for the first time in real combat. Thus, despite being one of the more seasoned and battle-hardened units in the Imperial military, the 11th Basilisk and their Valkyrie infantry were completely outmatched and outgunned by the other Worlders' army and their fantastic weapons of war, as well their newly allies. What was supposed to be the start of a glorious crusade against the barbarians, has become nothing more than an absolute bloodbath for the Imperials. Even those who were lucky enough to survive the anti-aircraft onslaught and make a break towards the Imperial border, soon found themselves being chased by ANF air power as the jets and attack helicopters finally arrived from Alness. Damn it, yelled in desperation Legate Scharnhorst, saying the death of his unit, damn it. Damn it all to hell. He then turned towards Sidera, but his route was quickly been cut off by ANF F-18s and Su-30s fighters, who blocked his way. He charged at them defiantly, yelling a mighty war cry, but his attack was futile, as one of the F-18s fired his missile, blowing his wyvern to bits, sending the poor legate to fall towards his death. Long live Emperor Zorzal, yelled Scharnhorst, before his body made a hard contact with the ground. What a loser, commented Rory, as she was hanging on Giselle's hand, who was flying above. Come on, let's go back. Out of an impressive force of over 300 dragons and 4,500 men Valkyries, less than 100 were eventually taken prisoner by the allied nations' forces in Italica. Despite their belief of superiority, Basilisk fell like so many others before it. But this sudden attack by the Empire was a hard reminder to the ANF in Florida, that Zorzal was still quite dangerous, even in his supposed weakened state. But despite this, the victory was a victory, as the newly born Falmart Liberation Army has proven themselves in first actual combat. Thus Prince Zorzal, instead of breaking up the new alliance, has only made it stronger, which was a sad case for already disparated usurper of the fading empire. However, Zorzal was still hoping that with his genius strategy, he'll be able to defeat the ANF and the Florida once and for all. Little did he know, is that his strategy was already been anticipated by Centurion Prime and other commanders. These rebels are completely disgrace to the Empire, yelled Absinthe, showing the document. According to this, they plan to give the Beastmen places in the Imperial Senate. What? Yelled one of the Hawks, are they serious? Give us to those barbarians. This is an outrage. Do not worry, senators, said Zorzal, for we already have the plan to crush those barbarians and their rebels, as the dogs they are. Allegro, bring the map. Several men brought the huge map and laid on the floor, while a man in legate armor began to explain the strategy. The enemy will come to Sidera from two ways, said Allegro, from Italica and Alnus. They will use the Appia Highway as their main road. We shall reinforce our garrisons at Duma fortresses, thus forcing the enemy to send most of their forces to combat the garrisons, while the rest of their forces will be allowed to proceed forward to Mare Forest, where exactly our main defense line will be built. Once the enemy is weakened at the Mare, said Zorzal, I shall personally counter-attack and destroy them completely. Then we will attack Italica, following by retaking the Alnus. Once we have the gate, we can finally be ready to attack the barbarians once more to punish them for the humiliation we have suffered in their world and because of the weak leadership by our father. Once we conquer the enemy capital, we shall force them to surrender to us, and then, we shall exact our revenge by enslaving their world. Yes, yelled the Hawks, revenge. Hearing this, Cassiopeia was grinning. Zorzal is doing exactly as she planned. It won't be long now, she thought, rubbing her belly. Soon, this fool will do all the dirty work for me. All I have to do is wait for the right moment to strike. Empress Cassiopeia, I like the sound of that, she laughed loudly as she walked down the corridor. That woman sure is obsessed, said Faruta. Never mind her, answered Sam's voice, we must be ready, the final bell is at hand. Outside Italica walls, the ANF and Florida men were gathered, as Rory performed her rites before the altar. O Emroy, she spoke, God of darkness and war, death and madness, crime and punishment. Grant your faithful servants the victory in the upcoming battle, as they go for their last trial. Let their hearts not tremble in the face of death, let their hands be strong as steel, and their swords not shattered. Let their souls rejoin in your kingdom. For as we go to war, so we shall proceed to you, our Lord. She then kneeled before the altar and pray, as well other people of Falmart. After reciting the praise, Rory then get up, and forward walked Centurion and Pina. 1 month before, said Centurion, we've come to this land to avenge those, who attacked our world and killed those people in Ginza. We've succeeded in defeating the Emperor Moltsal Augustus, but his traitorous son has taken over and resumed the war. Tomorrow, we shall finish what we've started. We are marching towards Sidera to finally storm the capital of the empire. Each of you received your orders. I expect all of you to carry out your duties with honor and bravery, as you always did. Your job is to punish all those, who committed crimes against our people, as well the people and species of Falmart. However, you must not allow to kill any innocent civilian or demi-human. Remember, we're coming to Sidera not to destroy it, but to liberate it from tyranny of the wicked and cruel man, who is one of those, who started this war, and to bring justice upon those, who attacked our land. Freedom to the people of Falmart. Death and punishment to those, who attacked Ginza. Glory to the allied nations' forces. Hoorah! Answered the Marines. Banzai, shouted the Japanese. Ura, shouted the Russians, the Germans, Indians and others. We, the people of Falmart, said Pina, are grateful to the other worlders for showing us the error of our ways. Ever since I've met Sir Prime in Italica, I've strived for peace in the Empire, but the Hawks didn't listen. My evil brother wants only war and conquest, they even defied the gods in their madness. It's time for us to punish them for their hubris. We shall march towards Sidera, but we shall go as allies with those, who came to punish Zorzel and those, who's responsible for this war, and to save the people of our world. For our people and our allies. For our people and our allies, repeated the soldiers of Florida. Move out, ordered Centurion. The soldiers got on board of their combat vehicles, while the knights and others got on their horses. Several Falmartians were also got into the trucks, which began to move from Italica. Rory and other girls were seated on the tank, enjoying the ride. On their way, Centurion began to sing the song of American heavy metal group, Manowar. Here our soldiers stand from all around the world, waiting in a line to hear the battle cry. All are gathered here, victory is near, Haruka join in, singing. The sound will fill the horn, bringing power to us all, singing Michiru. We alone are fighting for metal that is true, singed Eric. We own the right to live the fight, we're here for all of you. Now swear the blood upon your steel will never dry, singed Wolf. Stand and fight together beneath the battle sky. Then they all singed together, with other soldiers to join them. Brothers everywhere, raise your hands into the air. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Like thunder from the sky, sworn to fight and die. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Many stand against us, but they will never win, singed Eric. We said we would return, and here we are again. To bring them all destruction, suffering and pain, singed Yaren, the Leonoid. We are the hammer of the gods, we are thunder, wind and rain, singed Naren. There they wait in fear with swords in feeble hands, singed Rory. With dreams to be a king, first one should be a man. I call them out and charge them all with a life that is a lie, singed Duran. And in their final hour they shall confess before they die, singed Wolf. Brothers everywhere, raise your hands into the air, they all singed together. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Like thunder from the sky sworn to fight and die. We're warriors, warriors of the world. If I should fall in battle, my brothers who fight by my side, singing Gray. Gather my horse and weapons, tell my family how I died, singing Lloyd. Until then I will be strong, I will fight for all that is real, singing Pina. All who stand in my way will die by steel, they all singed together. Brothers everywhere raise your hands into the air. We're warriors, warriors of the world. We're the warriors of the world. Brothers everywhere, raise your hands into the air. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Like thunder from the sky sworn to fight and die. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Sworn to fight and die. Brothers everywhere, raise your hands into the air. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Brothers everywhere, raise your hands into the air. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Like thunder from the sky sworn to fight and die. We're warriors, warriors of the world. We're warriors, warriors of the world. Chapter 45, Operation Scipio, Fall of Sidera. The night was dark and cold. Nearby Duma Mountains, the main Allied nations' forces group were gathered. Tanks were in the position, artillery were loading their shells, drones checking the enemy positions. Soldiers were finishing their last cigars, commanders receiving last detail. Behind them, the Falmart Liberation Army forces were gathered, with their horses' heads been wrapped up in order to frighten them. In the G.I. Joe Mobile Headquarters General, Centurion was at his tactical monitor with several Florida commanders. "What time is it?" asked Centurion. "About 2:59, sir," answered Setsuna. "Send word to all our units," said Centurion, "commence operation in 1 minute." "Yes, sir," answered Michiru. 10 seconds left, said Haruka. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0300, sir. "Send out the code word, Michi," said Centurion. "Yes, sir," answered Michiru. "All units, listen up. Black, red, white, yellow, Marco, November, Alpha, Espilon, Peach, Sakura, Sakura." Confirming the code, heard it from radio, commencing operation now. At the ground, the tanks powered up their engines. Tommy and Eric's team clicked their safety off. Confirmation of the code, said the F-18 pilot. All units, proceed to your targets. Break, now. The jets then turned and dived towards the small fortress at Duma Mountains. At the Arkusa fortress, everything was quiet, when the Centurion heard a strange sound. What is that? He gasped. Next moment, all the hell breaks loose, as the Su-30 and F-18 began their attack on Arkusa. It was pandemonium, as the Imperial troopers were screaming in terror, understand nothing, while everything around them exploded. Target is destroyed, said F-18 pilot. Repeat, target is destroyed. Copy that, Black Sheep, answered the Pathfinder on the ground. Proceed to second target, our artillery will take over from here. Copy that, Oceloth, proceeding to target Beta. Black Sheep out. What's going on? Shouted the Imperial commander. Where's Centurion Negruz County Soma? Dead, sir, answered Shaking Man. All dead. Sir, shouted another legionary, the Florida troopers are crossing the river. You'll also like. What? Shouted Commander, but. He didn't know, that was his last words, as the F-18 flied over them and dropped his bombs. Thus, Second Imperial Fortress was been destroyed. Oceloth, this is Black Sheep, said the F-18 pilot, target Beta is destroyed. Grinder, this is Strike Leader, said Centurion into microphone, commence hammering. Jawohl, Herr General, answered the German artillery commander, artillery, commence fire. All German PS-2000 howitzers, M777 and Russian Tu-S19 MSTAS begin their devastating fire, following by the launching of rockets from MLRS, HIMARS, BM-27M and BM-30. What is that? Screamed the Imperial soldier, before the whole shower of fire and steel started to rain down on them. With no positions to hide, the Imperial soldiers died by hundreds. Several of them tried to run, but instead, they've been torn apart by the artillery fire. Some of them prayed to Emroy, while others just went mad because of the hellish scene commencing around them. This is Strike Leader to Yatsura-1, said Centurion. Colonel Camo, proceed with the advance. Strike Leader, this is Yatsura-1, answered Camo, we're moving out. At the fortress, many of those, who survived the bombardment, were practically in no conditions to fight. Some of them went mad, laughing like crazy, while several others were screaming because of the injury. Then, they heard some rumbling and looked, only to see, to their horror, a column of several Abramses, T-90Ms, Leopards and other tanks heading straight for them. It's the war elephants, screamed one of the legionaries, run. But as they run, before them appeared the sweepers, who killed several men. No retreat, shouted one of them, fall back into the line, or... Suddenly, his head exploded, while several other sweepers were killed. The demons, said one of the legionaries, the demons are here. Run. They runned in terror, as behind them, several disfigured men appeared. Nice work, ghosts, said Ferguson, come on, the operation has just begun. Hey, it's a good thing we took out that magician, said Min, he could have been a real trouble. Not anymore, replied Pepper, come on, let's go. By morning, the main advanced column has broken through the Imperial defenses, proceeding further into Duma Mountains. From the air, several remaining wyverns were trying to attack with throwing spears and jars of Greek fire, but all this was futile, as the SPAAG artillery were making short work out of them. From the mountains, armored ogres attacked with throwing rocks, but the tanks just turned and fired their guns, killing them. The Imperials then tried to attack with more armored ogres and flaming battering rams, but the rams couldn't penetrate the reactive armor of the tanks, while their cannons, as well ADATS missiles has made short work of armored ogres. In their last desperate attack, the Imperial heavy cavalry attacked, only to be shredded to pieces by Russian BMPT 123mm cannons. Don't run, shouted the sweepers, fight back. Death to those who dares fall back. I can't take it anymore, yelled one of the soldiers, thrusting his spear into sweeper's chest. We get to fight and die, and all you can do is to strike those who didn't make it. Enough is enough. Kill those wolf heads. The soldiers then turned onto sweepers and quickly killed them. Then they surrendered to ANF's forces. Several were able to escape, but their fate was far worse than death. Those people, who were victims of Zorzal's brutal scorched earth policy, has come for them with swords and pitchforks, hacking the escaped legionaries to pieces without mercy. At the Spree River, the Imperials tried to stop the ANF and its allies by destroying the bridge, but it was futile because bridgelayers were nearby. One of such bridgelayers was being operated by G.I. Joe Sargent, Major Tolbooth, who was also called as Magic Man, for his skills to make a bridge in order to cross the river. Meanwhile, further to the river, the Air Force was busy destroying the enemy boats, thus disrupting Zorzal's chain of supplies. While at the same time, the ANF's second column has approached the Mare fortress. The attack has begun by the aerial attack, which destroyed much of the towers of the fortress. Then the Ka-52 and AH-1 Cobra has begun their attacks, firing their missiles at the Imperial fortress. Following this, the Florida soldiers assaulted the fortress from the UH-1J helicopters, supported by the U.S. Marines. It was a skirmish in the fortress, as the Florida soldiers with swords and U.S. Marines with Ka-bar knives and bayonets fought against the Imperial soldiers. "Surrender," shouted Elban commander, "there's no need to die for the man who betrayed your empire for his own hubris." "Never," yelled one of the sweepers, "you sold us out to the barbarians. We will never betray the empire." "Oh, for fuck's sake," spat the U.S. Marine sergeant, "will somebody please kill that fucking wolfhead, so we can end this shit?" "Good idea, sir," answered the radio man, "Dragonfly, this is Outlaw. We got ourselves a wolfhead here. Need some exterminators." "Copy that, Outlaw," answered from the radio, "consider that fucker dead." Then, a shot rang out, and the sweeper's head was been blown to bits. "Your wolf is gone, you sheep," yelled the U.S. Marine sergeant, "drop those weapons and surrender. There's no point for you to die needlessly because of the one man's madness." The Imperial soldiers obeyed the words of the U.S. Marine soldiers and dropped their weapons, thus the Mare fortress has fallen in just a few hours. When Zorzal heard this, he believed it was a hoax, but when he realized it was all truth, he was furious. However, that didn't help much to stop the advance of the ANF troopers. Second was the Few fortress. The ANF attacked it in similar fashion, but the Imperials tried to counterattack with ballistas. Inside the fortress, King Duran's troopers encountered several heavy resistance. "Surrender," shouted Duran, "there's nowhere for you to run. Give yourselves up." "Go to hell, you old yokel," yelled one of the Imperials, "we can easily destroy you, if you dare to attack us." "Imperial dogs," spat Duran, "for such insult, I'll show them no mercy." "We can't pass through, your majesty," said one of the Elban troopers, "they've barricaded good there and got crossbows. None of us can pass a league to them." "Perhaps I can solve this problem," said G.I. Joe Blowtorch, "let my flamethrower speak to them." "All right, Sir Blowtorch," said Duran, "show them the might of the G.I. Joe." "Gladly, your majesty," said Blowtorch. "All right, you there, listen up. You've got one last chance to surrender, or I'll burn you to cinder." "You're the one who should surrender, barbarian," shouted the Imperial. "It won't be long before Emperor Zorzal arrives with his army to crush you. So go puff some smoke, you big mouth." "Fine," answered Blowtorch, "but don't say I didn't warn you." He fired his flamethrower at the Imperials. "Ah!" screamed one of the Imperials, "it's the fire magician." "But he's not firing at us," yelled another. "That's because I'm not aiming at you, dorks," answered Blowtorch, "I'm burning the oxygen." C choking, muttered one of the Imperials, as he fell on the floor, unable to breath. Blowtorch then turned off his flamethrower. "They're all yours, your majesty," he said. "Thank you, Sir Blowtorch," said Duran. "All right, lads, take 'em." With both Duma Mountain's fortresses were taken, the two columns moved further to Mare Forest. As expected, Zorzal's forces have prepared an ambush for them, but this time, they're in for a nasty surprise. Oops. This image does not follow our content guidelines. To continue publishing, please remove it or upload a different image. As Centurion agreed with Lysina, she has evacuated all animals from the forest. Then, the USMC-130H planes appeared, dropping 3 bombs on the Mare, thus completely burning all the enemy troops in the hidden holes. With them, also died Senators Clayton and Woody, as well General Potawan with Wyvern Corp. Thus the ANF and Florida continued their advance towards Sidera quite quickly. In Sidera, Zorzal was shocked to hear about the death of Senators Clayton, Woody and Potawan, but he was still confident that he'll be able to defeat the ANF and Florida at the hills nearby Sidera. "My Emperor," said Allegro, "the barbarian and rebel forces are approaching fast the hills nearby Sidera." "Excellent," grinned Zorzal, "they're coming right into my trap. Are the troops I requested are in place?" "Yes, my Emperor," answered Allegro, "all our troops are in positions at the hills, hidden in ambush pits. And the orgs, monsters and wyverns. Also in positions, ready by your command, my Emperor." "Excellent," laughed Zorzal, "at long last, our day of triumph has come. Tomorrow, we shall crush the barbarians and the rebels and begin our reconquest of the Alnus Hill and the other world. All the spoils of the war will be ours." "But, my liege," asked one of the generals, "most of our troops were been destroyed at Mare Forest by enemies' evil magic fire." "Ah, but they actually think they destroyed most of our forces," answered Zorzal, "but in reality, all our forces are gathered inside Sidera and on the hills." "I don't understand, my liege. You see, we deliberately allowed our forces at Duma Mountains and Mare to be destroyed, so that the enemy would believe that the road to Sidera is wide open. When they approached those hills, they'll be ambushed by our forces hidden in secret pits we've constructed. There be also a lot of ogres and other monsters waiting for them, as well 100 of wyverns that remained of sadly destroyed Basilisk Corp. And even if they manage to survive the ambush, our forces in Sidera will be able to hold them off, until our counter-attack will destroy them for good. Even their superior numbers will be proven futile. But, my liege, the commanders of other worlders and the rebels are quite capable and experienced, they'll surely be able to find out your trap." "True, which is why I'm gonna get rid of them." "How?" "Quite simple. I've asked them about the meeting at the hill. Once they come, our troops on my signal will jump on them and kill them. Without their leaders, those armies are good as dead." Zorzal then laughed at his supposed triumph. Cassiopeia just stood off to the side, as she listened quietly, barely able to contain her anxiousness, as she knew that fighting the allied nations' forces would result in the destruction of Zorzal, and her years-long goal would finally be reached. Much sooner than she thought, the conquest of the empire, with her as new empress. "Tomorrow, we shall finally crush both the rebels and the barbarians once and for all," laughed Zorzal. Initially called Ilvermany by the Australian troops that now occupied it, FOB. Somerset was an old fort that had long since been abandoned by Sidera before the ANF came. Just one of many such compounds that were now being used for operations by the ANF, and prior to Operation Shadow, it was the closest ANF outpost to the imperial capital. It was in Somerset where the first units were deployed into Sidera for Operation Shadow, and it was intended for Somerset to be used as a launching point if the Operation Scipio was been successful. At first it looked as if Somerset would have just been a footnote in the war, as it seemed that the war would end with Molt's surrender. But now it looked like as if Somerset would be used for its intended purpose, as the contingent of U.S. Marines and Philippine commandos now hosted elements of 3rd Tracks and JGSDF. The ACVs of the United States Marine Corps were now parked just outside the old fort's walls and were now under heavy guard. An impromptu tent city having been created by the Marines now positioned there, as a pair of CH-53s delivered another payload of ammunition for the combat vehicles. Both the JDS Shinano and JDS Tone were now docked on the small jetty that led to the fort itself, as a flotilla for fast attack craft began to form up alongside the Japanese river monitors. Their crews checking their equipment to pass the time, as they waited for the order to move on the imperial capital. Despite their obvious technological superiority, the Marines and soldiers currently posted at Somerset held no illusions about the upcoming operation. They were quite literally going into heart of the enemy, against a highly motivated foe who would be fighting to protect their homes. Both Somalia and Yugoslavia had thought the Marines just how dangerous such an enemy could be, and there really was no telling just what kind of nasty surprises waited for them. An arrow could still cut flesh, a spear can still impale a human body, an enraged dragon wyvern could still dangerous on the battlefield, and the ANF would be going into the thick of it. In the camps, some of the ACV crews decided to pass the time by doing some final checks on their vehicles. As well as decorating their war machines with rather interesting paint schemes, and Tanker 6 was no different. A menacing, shark's mouth, with reptile-like eyes now adorned the front of the amphibious vehicle, much like many others in their unit. But what really made Tanker 6 stand out, was that both Williams and Puller had painted the seal of the Berks County Volunteer Fire Department on each side of their vehicle's turret. Normally, such practices would be frowned upon by those in command, but had relaxed those rules to allow morale to build among the troops. But while the troops did what they could to pass the time, those who would be leading them into battle were going over some final details that needed to be sorted out. Sedera itself covered an area roughly half the size of Manhattan and had a population of just under 500,000 people. There were also several major canals that not only ran through the city, but connected Sedera with the Morua River, which itself flows into the Etna River. As a result, ships of the coastal colonies could sail directly into the capital itself, and there were even several docks that allowed goods to be offloaded from said ships. Not surprisingly, the ANF leadership saw Sadara's canal system as a way for their forces to enter the city, as well as deny Zorzals any means of escape. Certain units would be assigned a particular canal to infiltrate and capture the port facilities that existed on them, as well as support ANF units that would be deployed through other means. In one particular tent that had been set up next to Tanker 6, the ACV's crew were sound asleep. The last couple days had been rather stressful, and with an offensive set to happen sometime in the near future, the Marines were at least trying to get some sleep before they would be forced to move out. Well, most of them were, as there was one individual who was absent at that time. Laying on top of the ACV, Corporal Williams stared into the pre-dawn sky as he took another swig from his bottle of cherry coke. The Marine had woken up half an hour earlier out of habit and had decided to spend some time alone. His mind awash with thoughts of both the upcoming operation and his pending discharge from the Corps. But most of all, his mind was focused on a certain young woman he now found himself in relationship with, and was thinking about just what life would be like with her in it. The Marine Corporal chuckled to himself at this point, realizing just how absurd the last month was been. A month ago he was single and being deployed to Japan for what was supposed to have been a training exercise, and now here he was with an aggressive yet cute girlfriend, in another world and waiting to launch an attack on an enemy city. Life could be rather screwy at times, isn't it? You know, she's probably thinking about you too right now, a familiar voice said with a giggle, something that caught Williams off guard and almost caused him to fall off Tanker 6. Rory, how did you get here? And why are the rest of here too? The Marine asked the Apostle, noticing that she had brought both Lele and Tuka with her as well. As the Apostle of Emroy, I go where I please, Rory replied with her trademark smile. Still does not explain why Tuka and Lele are here with you. They came with me, Atami announced, as he walked up to the ACV commander. Atami, surprised Williams replied, I thought you were with the main group at the hills. Not anymore, answered Atami. The command has wanted us to participate in the upcoming operation by joining the third column, but Rory insisted on finding you first before anything else. Really? Why? The Marine asked, as he crooked his eyebrow, a puzzled expression forming on his face, as the Apostle of Emroy walked up to the ACV and leapt onto the amphibious vehicle. Effortlessly landing next to Williams, the demi-goddess then proceeded to get on her knees and hug the dark-skinned Marine tightly, much to the surprise of everyone that saw them. Thank you, she whispered to him in English, thank you for being my first. Ah, a now very shocked Williams exclaimed, his eyes wide in horror as he almost lost his balance, but the Apostle's embrace held him in place. What in heaven's name are you talking about? Rory just giggled before she replied. Not in that way. I thank you for being my first couple. Just what's going on, Rory? Williams. Although there are many gods that exist in this world, there are none for love. Rory began to explain. When an apostle finishes their 1,000 years of service, they have the option of becoming a god themselves. Yet, none of those who has ascended to such status has ever taken up the mantle of the god or goddess of love. Love is quite possibly the most powerful emotion a mortal can possess, more powerful than hate, so powerful it can bring two lonely souls together to form a bond that cannot be broken. My time as being an apostle of Emroy will come to an end in less than 30 years, and I intend to become the goddess of love when my time finally arrives. I have not yet ascended to such a status, yet, I am happy to see that you and Shino found each other when you did. Wait, what? A still very much confused corporal asked the raven-haired demi-goddess that was still holding him. I may not have had brought you and Shino together, but I can tell that the two of you had a bond the moment I saw the two of you together, though it was more of an one-sided affection at first. Rory giggled, remembering how Shino was all but falling over herself to get the Marine to notice her. But eventually you did develop feelings for her, and I can tell that those feelings strong, even though you do a better job of concealing that fact from others. It still does not explain how I am your first. Williams grimaced at that apparent title. Rory just smiled. I say that you are my first because you and Shino are my first. The apostle explained. The two of you are the first couple to have my blessing, even though I am still just an apostle to the god of war. With my blessing, will come a life filled with love and bliss between the two of you, and I am certain that Shino will bless you with many children. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Who said anything about us having kids? Williams exclaimed, almost falling off of Tanker 6, and Rory released him. We're just dating. For now, you mean, Rory replied, before she leapt off the ACV and rejoined her companions. I think we should get some rest, yes. And with that, Rory made her way towards the old fortress with both Lele and Tuka in tow, leaving a stunned Williams behind. If it means anything, Lewis, Atami began, you took the news a lot better than Shino did. Great, grumbled the Marine, speaking about which, what about Puller and Yao? Oh, they having their time, alright. Great, just fucking great. At the hills, the ANF and Florida units have arrived. Contact dead ahead, said the tank commander. All units, stop at the 400 meters of the enemy, ordered Centurion. Everyone, be on alert, it looks like Zorzel is preparing an ambush for us. Roger that, sir. Mitchell, I want you and your ghosts to scout the area, see if there are any hidden traps. Copy that, sir. Centurion then seated in the general command seat, watching the monitors. What do you make of this, Sir Prime? Asked Pina. The way I see it, answered Centurion, Zorzel is planning an ambush. He deliberately wanted us to go in the open, so that his hidden troops can jump on us. I didn't expect much from Zorzel, replied Tyul. Then why can't we ignore that bastard, growled Wolf. We can't, answered Duran, if we do not come, we lose our honor, which is higher for us than life, so even if this is a trap, we must proceed. I understand that, Your Majesty, said Centurion, however, I do not want us to walk right into a trap. Therefore, we shall take a little precautions, just in case Zorzel has any tricks for us. He zoomed the camera in on the large grouping of enemy soldiers, but the thermal camera couldn't give him great detail, but he could see individual bodies all standing in tight formation as if they were eagerly awaiting them. But something caught Centurion's eye. Large bodies, much larger than the average person, dotted the formations of Imperial soldiers. Armored ogres, he said, we've seen those. Looks like 100 of them. He scanned the formations further until he finally found what he was looking for, a small group of people on horses standing in front of the Imperial troopers. And there's Zorzel, said Centurion, looks like he's grinning on something. Probably on his supposed triumph, snorted Tyul. Overlord, have you finished scouting? Asked Centurion on his radio. Affirmative, Strike Leader, answered Mitchell's voice. Looks like the area does not have any traps, but there's something else here. Several concealed holes with tarps, well camouflaged but badly hidden. I see, said Centurion, looks like Zorzel is planning to ambush us. Overlord, the Florida and I will go out there to meet Zorzel. I want you and the ghosts to stay right behind us, cover us in case those holes are filled with the enemy troopers. Copy that, Strike Leader. We'll be in position, waiting for you, ghosts out. Centurion then get up and turned to others. Well, gentlemen, he said, this is it. We're going out there to meet Zorzel, but I must remind you, that you must follow my command, if you want to survive. When I say, lay down and don't move, you'll do exactly what I tell you, otherwise, you'll be caught in the crossfire. We understand you, Sir Prime, answered Pina, and we trust you. Good, said Centurion, walking to the exit, follow me. He then leaves the general and walked to the field, following by others. My liege, said Allegro, the barbarians' commander and the rebels are coming to us. Perfect, grinned Zorzel, you stay here. This is one moment I cannot miss by myself. He then righted to them. Strike leader, this is Overlord, Mitchell's voice sounded in Centurion's headset. Be advised, Zorzel is out in the field. Copy that, Overlord, answered Centurion, you keep us covered, we'll talk with Prince Snorkel. Understood, Strike leader. Good luck. Ghosts out. Centurion and others were walking in the line, presenting themselves quite odd mixture of races and humans. A modern-age soldier, a knight princess and her page, a king, a warrior bunny, a Volraden, an elf, a dwarf, a hobbit, a leonoid and a catman. But they all marched together with pride, representing a union of the free people of Falmart. While on their opposite side, Zorzel was dressed in his ceremonial armor. Soon, both groups reached the center of the field. Centurion and his allies stopped, while Zorzel got off his horse. So, said Zorzel, we finally meet, barbarian. I can see that you still didn't learn a thing since your past mistakes, Zorzel, replied Centurion. Oh, on the contrary, Centurion, answered Zorzel, I did learn a few things about you. You're soft, that's why you allowed those filthy animals to join you in Pina. Spare us the insults, Zorzel, spat Wolf. Speak up, why did you want to meet us here, said Naren. Oh, isn't that obvious, quipped Zorzel, I came to accept your surrender. Hearing this, Duran and others, aside Pina, Hamilton and Tyul, were laughing hard. You must be joking, laughed Duran, why should we surrender to you? Because if you do, I'll be merciful to you, answered Zorzel, if you not, well, I'll just have to destroy you. And just pray tell us, Zorzel, asked Pina, how are you going to do that? Funny you should ask, Pina, replied Zorzel, after all, I am a tactical genius. I've planned this battle straight to the letter. Then tell you what, Zorzel, said Centurion, why won't we lay down our cards on the table? You show us your assets, and we show you ours. As you wish, answered Zorzel, you see, I have 200,000 men, many of which are monsters who were enlisted to fight you. And at least 100 trolls, the giant monsters you see back there. They have the strength to wear much heavier armor to defend against your weapons. They'll be able to take out your armored carriages once they get their hands on them, and your men will be torn to pieces. After all, your lighting arrows won't be able to breach our front line, because our soldiers are all carrying steel-plated shields. Go on, nodded Centurion, folding his arms. And even if you did manage to somehow destroy our army and still have enough to lay siege to the capital, we have tens of thousands more hiding behind the walls. You'd have to fight us close range, and that's where we'll excel. Your soldiers can't fight us as well in very close quarters, you require distance. This is a war you cannot win. Centurion just chuckled, hearing those arrogant words. Boy, was he's wrong. Little did Zorzel know, is that the ANF troopers were all trained in CQC battle, especially Japanese, who used the art of Jukendo, Chinese with their knowledge of martial arts, Russians with their Sambo and the US Marines, who's practically earned their skills at Somalia and Yugoslavia by fighting the enemies in close-quarter combat. But he didn't say anything, just continuing to listen to Zorzel. Oh, and one more thing, said Zorzel, I've heard it, that your woman is quite beautiful, right? Let me guess, answered Centurion, you want her as your personal slave, right? That's right, said Zorzel with sadistic smile, I'll make you a deal, Centurion, if you die or are defeated miserably in this battle, I promise to take good care of your woman for you. After all, being my toy should be considered an honor compared to being the girlfriend of a barbarian. I cannot believe this, yelled Yaren. Satyr and hyena, growled Tyul, grabbing the handle of her kukri. Brother, you are insane, yelled Pina. But then Centurion raised his hand, silencing them. They all looked to see Centurion smiling. You are so predictable, he said, I knew that a sexual psychopath, like you, couldn't resist Michiru. But by putting your sight on her, you've made your last mistake, Zorzel. That's Emperor Zorzel to you, arrogantly stated Zorzel. Then I've got a bad news for you, Emperor Airhead, said Centurion, the only two things you rule right now is Jack and shit, and Jack got the hell out of town. You dare to mock me, growled Zorzel. Oh, I've got something much worse for you, Emperor of Fools, smiled Centurion, you see, you've made 3 terrible mistakes, that practically sends all your precious strategy down to shit. And what might that be, snarled Zorzel, looking really annoyed. "Your first mistake is underestimating me," said Centurion, then pointed to the nearby razes. "I know you have dozens of soldiers hiding in small camouflaged holes nearby behind you. I can easily see those unnatural razes in the grass from here, and in case you didn't know, so are my troopers. They can easily target those ambush holes and kill all those hidden troopers." Zorzel's mood quickly changed from anger to panic, as he realized that Centurion has uncovered his traps. "Your second mistake was to underestimate my army," said Centurion. "They can destroy their enemies by targeting them for 50 leagues radius. In fact, your whole army in those hills is nothing more than standing targets." "That's impossible," shouted Zorzel. "There's no way your magical cannons can fire at such range." "Oh, no," answered Centurion. "Allow me then to give you a small demonstration. Smirch, this is Strike Leader. Fire at the coordinates 11 Alpha Kilo, full shave." "Copy that, Strike Leader," answered the Russian BM-30 commander, firing now. Zorzel then saw something coming out with a smoke from behind the forest. "What is that?" he gasped. "Say hello to one of our ultimate weapons," grinned Centurion. "Watch that hill over there. Oh. Wait, that's not the hill. That's your cavalry staging area. Too bad." "What?" gasped Zorzel, as he heard a strange wailing sound. Next moment, the whole hill exploded in series of several explosions. Zorzel could only watch in horror, as he saw horses, men and the debris flying high in the air, before they fell down on the ground. "That was just one of my BM-30 launchers," said Centurion. "We got a whole brigade of them, about 60 launchers, and they are just the tip of the iceberg. They can easily destroy all your army with one shot." "Why, you," snarled Zorzel, looking with hate at Centurion. "And your third mistake is," said Centurion in grim tone, glaring at Zorzel, "you can threaten me, you can call me barbarian, but don't you dare to touch my loved ones, especially my girlfriend. Those who dare to lay their hands on Michiru will suffer the worst of my wrath." "Grr," growled Zorzel, "you and others will die now. Soldiers, attack." Dozens of soldiers appeared from their hidden foxholes and began rushing towards Centurion and his group. "It's an ambush," yelled Duran. "There's too many of them," shouted Pina. "Everyone, drop on the ground and lay still," ordered Centurion. "But, Sir Prime," said Hamilton. "That's an order, Hamilton, do it now," barked Centurion. Everyone, aside from Centurion, has quickly laid on the ground. "What's this?" laughed Zorzel, "you letting the others to be trampled by my soldiers." "Just getting them from the line of fire, asshole," answered Centurion Mitchell. As he also dropped, the ground lit up with loud bangs and flashes as ghosts began shooting at the enemy. Zorzel watched as well-placed shots found their marks in his ambush, soldiers dropping them all effectively 10 feet away from Centurion's crew, who laid on the ground, safely away from the ghost's fire. Then just as quickly as it happened, the shot stopped. Zorzel looked around to see only 7 of his soldiers remained, still charging at Centurion and others. "Now, my friends," barked Centurion, "attack." He and others quickly rised up, with Pina and other commanders unsheathed their weapons. As the soldiers approached them, the Florida commanders made a short work with them, slicing Zorzel's soldiers with their weapons. Centurio, however, met his opponent with his fists. As the soldier attacked him, Centurion shattered his sword with a punch, then he throws another into soldier's face. Following this, he unleashed a series of blows against the soldier, hitting his face with multiple jabs. Following this, he hit the soldier in the face, causing him to fly backwards. "Get up!" yelled Zorzel, "attack him. 1,000,000 of denaries, if you bring me that barbarian's head." "You should spend some money on that soldier's funeral," said Centurion. "What?" gasped Zorzel. "He's already dead," said Centurion. "Don't be ridiculous," barked Zorzel, "you've only—" "Ah!" screamed the soldier, interrupting Zorzel's words. Zorzel then looked at the soldier and, to his horror, saw his head blowing to pieces. This sensation has shocked Zorzel to the core. For this first time, he has witnessed Centurion's Hokuto Shinken. He then looked at Centurion's face, only to see him staring straight back into Zorzel's eyes, with a fire in them that Zorzel was sure would have frozen his soul in fear, if he wasn't already overwhelmed with the instinct to run from seeing his soldiers chopped down like child's play. Then Centurion pointed his finger at Zorzel. "You're next," he said. Eek, squealed Zorzel, imagining his own head blowing to pieces. He jumped on his horse and rided back to his force as fast as he can. Centurion just chuckled, watching him riding. Run, you cowardly rat, he said, cause this cat loves to hunt its preys. Are you all right, Sir Prime? Asked Pina. I'm fine, answered Centurion. Come on, let's get back to our forces, the battle is about to start. Mitchell, cover us. Understood, sir. Centurion and Florida commanders walked back to their forces. As they reached the line of ANF troopers, Centurion climbed back into the general, taking his seat. What now, Sir Prime? Asked Duran. We wait, answered Centurion. For what? Asked Wolf. For Zorzel making his first mistake, answered Centurion. Huh? Everyone looked at Centurion with confusion, while he explains. Listen well comrades, the first rule of strategy is to know your enemy, of course this is easier said than done. Thus the second rule of strategy, is if you know your enemy that well, you control his thoughts. How, Sir Prime? Asked Hamilton. Quite simple, answered Centurion, you see, I deliberately made Zorzel angry, and when he gets angry, he wants vengeance, and to get vengeance he wants it up close and personal. First Zorzel is going to send in his armored ogres to shield his troopers. As he said, the screen shown several armored ogres appearing on the field. Next he'll send his foot soldiers close behind the ogres, to when the ogres reach us he'd have his soldiers swarm our lines and slaughter us at close range, where his soldiers would have the advantage in combat, said Centurion, as the infantry appeared right behind the ogres. To attack us from the air, he'll send his wyverns, said Centurion, as the screen then shown several wyverns, coming fast to them. And finally, said Centurion, he'll send his cavalry from the sides, to cut our escape routes. Then the screen shown several groups of cavalry at the sides of ogres. Now, that he laid down his cards, said Centurion, we can begin. Michiru, send the code word. Yes, sir, answered Michiru, attention, all units. Commence, El Alamein. Then, from the air, appeared F-18 and Su-30, which attacked Zorzel's wyverns, while the Su-39 and A-10A fired their deadly weapons at ogres. Ka-52 and AH-1Y Venom appeared from the sides and began to massacre the cavalry units, while the artillery and MLRS fired their deadly guns, blowing Zorzel's infantry to bits. Zorzel couldn't do anything, but to watch in horror, as his mighty army quickly dies right before his eyes. He then remembered Centurion's eyes and became more frightened than ever. He quickly turned his horse and rided back to Sidera with others, leaving what's left of his army to be destroyed. Now, that our so-called emperor has turned chicken, said Centurion, we shall finish what's left of his army. All tank units, commence the attack. Stop only at the 1,000 meters from the capital. The tanks then broke off their positions, rolling over the bodies of Zorzel's troops and monsters, following by infantry units. As they stopped nearby the walls of Sidera, Centurion and other commanders looked at the walls. Looks like they've got a lot of troops up there, said Centurion, putting down his binoculars. We can't get through the gates, said Pina, they've been reinforced by additional troops. And those walls are quite tough, said Duran, it'll be months before we can breach them. Don't be so sure, Your Majesty, answered Centurion, you see, we've already got our problem solved. Suddenly, they heard the engine noise. Pina and others turned to see, as two tractors carried quite a big cannon. What is that? Gasped Pina. That, Your Highness, answered Centurion, is the thunderclap cannon. It fires 450mm shells, which can destroy any hardened fortified object, including the enemy bunkers. It'll be just what we need to get through those walls. Now then, get back to your forces. Remember, once we get through, your groups will act as our close-quarter combat units. Yes, General Prime, said Duran, all right, you heard him. Let's go. It's time for us to do our part in this battle. Back at the Sidera, Zorzel was feeling much safer after the nightmare he suffered at the hills. Maybe indeed he had bitten off more than he could chew and indeed underestimated those barbarians, but it was only a minor setback. He still had the other worlders outside the city walls, which would take years to be destroyed. By that time, his reinforcements will arrive, and the rebels with the savages will be destroyed. Once he have Centurion's head, he would be taking his sister's so-called knights as his personal concubines. They would have no choice, unless they wanted to die alongside their families. Yet despite his success, Zorzel still could not help but to think that he was still being denied a much greater victory. Sure, Sidera was now under his complete control, but there were still no word from any of the messengers he had sent out announce his ascension to the imperial throne. Not a single dragon wyvern rider had returned to the capital with messages from the many governors and nobles' houses swearing their loyalty to the new emperor. What was the point being the emperor, if did not even know if those beyond Sidera's walls supported him? No matter, they would soon be given the choice to either swear loyalty to their new emperor, or feel the taste of cold hard steel upon their flesh. His armies would make sure that his rule would not only be unquestioned, but absolute. As far as Zorzel was concerned, he would not be a true emperor, until the empire bowed down to his might and power. Suddenly, he heard what sounded like thunder in the distance. Making his way onto the balcony that overlooked the city below, the self-proclaimed emperor could see that the sky was clear, but yet, the sounds of thunder just kept getting louder and louder. Just what in Flair's name was going on? Shouted in fear Zorzel. Suddenly, a massive fireball erupted from the city below, coming from the direction of the Basti Wharf on the Edo Canal. Moments later the sound of the explosion reached the palace and shook the marble structure with everyone in it. Moments later another fireball, this time coming from the East Gate, rocked the city and its population once again. But they had little time to recover as a third explosion struck the L&T district and the location of the Imperial War Academy. Zorzel just stood there in a shocked silence, his mouth agape as more and more fireballs erupted from the city he controlled. An unfamiliar sense of uncertainty and dread soon fell upon the self-proclaimed monarch, as he looked on at the destruction taking place before him. As much as he wanted to deny it, Zorzel knew deep down just what was going on. The other worlders are now attacking Sidera. Meanwhile, thousands of feet above the imperial capital, Black Sheep 04 and his winged man looked on at their handiwork. As their F-18s flew unchallenged in the early morning skies and searched for their next target. Within minutes of receiving orders to initiate attack, coalition aircraft began targeting buildings and enemy encampments that had been spared during Rolling Thunder days before. But while Rolling Thunder was to break the morale of the Sateran people and bring their government to the peace table, Operation Instant Thunder was intended to soften up the imperial forces residing in the city, as well as give the empire another taste of shock and awe. But Sidera was not the only city to feel the wrath of the coalition warplanes. Several major garrisons located in a number of nearby towns outside the capital were targeted as well, including the very same dragon pens where Basilisk had taken off from days earlier. As this was going on, Shinano and Tome had moved in and engaged a number of imperial longships that were docked near the entrance to the city canal system. The two Japanese river monitors making short work of the Imperial Naval Forces, their GAU-12 Avenger cannons tearing the wooden warships apart with little effort. No sooner had the Imperial ships been destroyed and the way made clear, a flotilla of American and Indian patrol craft began to work their way up the many canals that snaked through the city. Following behind, were third tracks and their complement of Marines and Japanese soldiers. Their objective was to secure a number of wharfs to allow ANF barges to dock and offload more troops. The people of Carly Village were more than happy to build vessels for the coalition, as long the dragon scales were good that is. Using a flight of stairs that lead down towards the water, Tanker 6 made its way into the Imperial City. Its turret swinging side to side as if it was expecting to encounter some resistance, as more ACVs came up behind it and deployed their complement troops. Within minutes, the area was firmly in the hands of the Marines, and not too long after this information was relayed to command, a pair of what looked like to landing craft utilities sailed up the canal and came to berth at the newly acquired beachhead. No sooner had the large wooden vessels been secured, large ramps were lowered to reveal U.S. Marine Corps MRAPs armed with either 50 cal machine guns or M134 miniguns. One thing the ANF command has stated, was that large vehicles such as main battle tanks would be mostly ineffective within Sidera itself. The narrow streets would make it impossible for the main battle tanks of the coalition to navigate, as well as make them and their crews easy targets for Imperial forces. The ACVs and AAVs that were being used were deemed more suitable due to their ability to use Sidera's canal system to navigate through the city, while the Max Pros being fielded by the Marines were more suited for the narrow streets of Sidera itself. But the amphibious assault by the Marines was only part of a much larger operation, for no sooner had the first ACVs and patrol craft entered Sidera via the canals, a massive formation of Japanese, American, Russian and Indian transport aircraft suddenly appeared over the city and made their way to their designated targets. Apart from important buildings and encampments, potential anti-air weapons were destroyed by the coalition airstrikes. With whatever Dragons and Wyverns were able to get airborne during the coalition attacks, were quickly eliminated by Russian Su-37s providing cover for the strike aircraft. Skies are clear over the capital, over. Roger, moving to Phase 2. No sooner had the all-clear been given, the Indian and Japanese transports made their final approach toward Sidera itself. The sun had yet to blanket the countryside with its rays, as the first C-2 aircraft came in. We're green. Jump, 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 cooed, cooed, cooed. Geronimo. Yo Joe. Within seconds, hundreds of Japanese, American, GI. Joe Russian and Indian paratroopers exited their aircraft, their parachutes deploying as they were designed to, as both men and equipment floated towards the earth below. A magnificent sight indeed. They would be landing within the second tier of the city, where most of the government buildings were located. They were to prevent any Imperial forces from the upper levels of the city from advancing towards the beachheads which had been established by the amphibious forces. The paratroopers were to hold these points until the Marines and JGSDF units advanced and linked up with the airborne troops in the second tier. Japanese Special Operations units and Mitchell's Ghosts were also busy as well, as they had successfully captured the north and west gates that lead into Sidera itself, making short work of the Imperial soldiers who were on post at the time. The capture of these gates not only denied Zorzel a route from which he could have used to escape, but allow safe passage of any civilians wishing to flee the city. In less than an hour of the operation start, Allied nations' forces had not only managed to achieve all their objectives, but had done so with little to no resistance from the would-be defenders. By now American ACVs and Max Pros crawled their way through Sidera's streets unopposed, as they inched their way towards one of the many access points that had been captured by the paratroopers. The much-feared Imperial army that Endgame had warned about, never appeared and was replaced by small groups of fanatical, scorchiers, launching suicidal charges against ANF units. "Fire!" ordered Centurion. The massive thunderclap cannon shook the ground with an enormous thunder, as it fired its 350mm shell, that slammed the walls of Sidera, shattering them to pieces. The stone wall all but disintegrated as the super-heavy shell hit the wall and exploded. The wall crumbled and gave way beneath them. Those who weren't killed by the explosions of the shell, or barely escaped, were crushed by the crumbling wall. "The wall has fallen," shouted Pena. "Attack! Forward!" roared Duran. "Storm the city!" The Florida troopers were the first to enter the city. First came Tyul's warrior bunnies, Yaren's Leonoids and Wolf's Volradens. Their job was to act as scouts for the advancing teams. Following them was Pena's Rose Knights and Duran's Elves soldiers, with Naren's Dark Elves with them as well. Right behind them was Centurion's units of ANF, ready to provide any assistance to their allies. Despite the apparent large scale of the ANF and Florida assault and air strikes, the majority of Sidera was still relatively untouched by the fighting. In reality, the ANF had focused their assault on all the major entry-exit points of the city. Despite being the smallest districts within the imperial capital, the upper ring of Sidera was still a sizable piece of real estate. As historically the central districts was where many of the most powerful noble families in the empire either lived, or at least kept a residence there for reasons only known to themselves, including the imperial palace. So it was not that surprising that the upper ring was also one of the more well-defended districts of the imperial capital, as the walls that surrounded it were thicker and larger than what existed on the outskirts. It was also not too surprising that Emperor Zorzel had yet to leave the safety of his ill-gotten palace to meet the other worlders in battle. As a matter of fact, the royal had instead ordered his inner circle to meet with him to discuss just what in Hardy's name was going on. Where are the city garrisons? Where is the mighty army to defend Sidera and its emperor? Exclamation mark. Where are his generals and why were they unable to push those savages out of his city? Exclamation mark. The sight of the paratroopers jumping from their aircraft and landing safely in the middle ring had a sobering effect on the prince. Just what kind of magic could allow men to jump from great heights, yet fall so slowly and land without injury? This question just reaffirmed Zorzal's belief that these other worlders had no honor and had to resort to magic and other devious tactics to defeat the mighty Sateran army. Suddenly, one of Zorzal's advisors came into his throne room with a troubled expression on his weathered face. "Allegro, where are the generals?" Zorzal asked angrily, as he glared at the man before him. "My liege," Allegro said apologetically, "the generals, they are not coming." "What?" the prince roared in disbelief. "What is the meaning of such treachery?" "My liege, they said that they will no longer be a part of your madness. They said they are not going to allow their men to die for what they call a lost cause," the weathered advisor explained, remembering what he had been told by the imperial officers who had more or less killed the commanders who were loyal to Zorzal and had mutinied. Of course, Allegro was wise enough to keep that fact to himself. There was no telling just how Zorzal would react when he found out that his inner circle no longer existed. "This is treason," Zorzal bellowed, as he threw his jug of wine across the throne room in a blind rage, the ceramic container smashing against the marble wall with predictable result. "I shall have their heads for this betrayal." "Yes, my liege," Allegro replied, before he quickly left the furious royal to brood alone. But as Zorzal sat quietly and stewed in his own anguish and pain, he could have never foreseen just what would come next. With the beachheads fully secured and with more men and equipment now flowing into the city, both the Marines and JSDF began their push into the city and towards the second tier. Resistance had been light, as few Imperial soldiers attempted to fight off the invasion force. But their efforts were futile at best, as many of them were cut down by coalition assault rifles and heavy machine gun fire. Leading the push into the city were the amphibious assault vehicles of the United States Marine Corps. Specifically those that were armed with the 30mm autocannon as their primary weapon. Behind them would a combination of Max Pros, JLTVs and/or Komatsu Lavs carrying either American or Japanese troops. Tanker 6 was a part of one of these advancing columns, whose objective was to link up with elements of 82nd Airborne who had just recently captured one of the entry points leading into the second tier. Inside the ACV, Williams and his team sat silently as the amphibious vehicle slowly rumbled through the deserted city streets. So far, their column had not encountered any of Sadera's civilian population. More than likely they were all held up inside homes, too afraid to come face to face with the barbarians from another world. For so long they had believed that Sadera was a fortress that would protect them from the other worlders. Now they were hiding in fear in their own in a city they once thought was safe. Even the presence of Rory Mercury herself, who rode on top of Tanker 6 with her axe at her side, did little to reassure the populace. Then again, how you would feel if you saw the infamous Rory the Reaper riding on top another World War wagon. It also did not help that Rory looked as if she enjoyed being on top of the ACV a little too much. Behind the amphibious combat vehicle, Atami and the rest of 3rd Recon rode quietly within their Humvees and LAV. Within Atami's Humvee, both Tuka and Lele looked on at the Imperial city as they drove by. Never once could they have imagined visiting the Imperial capital in such a manner, let alone as part of an invasion. Both women looked on in wonder as a pair of Golden Eagle combat jets screamed low overhead and vanished as quickly as they appeared. As coalition helicopters buzzed low overhead in support of the advancing ground forces. Every so often, the girls would catch sight of the numerous plumes of smoke rising over the Sateran skyline. A result of the air strikes that had taken place earlier that morning. Despite being well aware of just what the ANF was capable of, both the mage and the forest elf were still quite taken aback by what they were seeing. Eventually, the joint American-Japanese force arrived at gates leading into the second tier of Sadera and were greeted by the soldiers that now guarded the newly established checkpoint. Rory skillfully leapt off the ACV and landed in front of unit's commander, who was rather bewildered by the sight of a oddly dressed, young child, with a large axe standing before him. Fortunately for the American paratrooper, Atami had exited his Humvee and walked up to the pair. "I am Lieutenant Atami, of the JGSDF, who is in command here," he asked in English. "Ah, yes. That would be me, the paratrooper replied, Captain James Morrow, U.S. Army 82nd Airborne Division. What is your current status? So far, we have had zero contact with the enemy since we took this position, Morrow explained, as the last Max probe passed through the gateway. We did encounter some resistance when we made our assault, but it did not last long. We were able to secure the gateway and have established a perimeter around our location. Did you take any prisoners? Morrow shook his head before he replied. I'm afraid not. They all charged my men and we were forced to defend ourselves. The bastards never knew what hit them. Understood. Atami said grimly, as he knew the paratroopers did what they had to prevent casualties within their own ranks. The lieutenant was about to ask the Americans more questions when another paratrooper ran up to the two men with his radio in hand. Sir, we've received a message from a ghost unit operation near the prison. The young man said. They've reported that a large enemy force is advancing their location and are requesting reinforcements to help with their extraction. Lieutenant, we are the closest armored unit to their location, Corporal Williams told his commander friend, as the Marine had stuck his head out of the top hatch of the ACV upon hearing the paratrooper's statement. If we leave right now, we should be there in 5 minutes. Captain, contact the team and inform help is on the way. Let's roll out, Atami told the army captain, before running back to his Humvee. Anticipating the battle to come, Rory gleefully leapt back on top of Tanker 6 just as the 8x8 rumbled forward towards the Imperial prison. 2 of the 4 Max Pros that were initially a part of their column remained behind to reinforce the paratroopers guarding the gate, along with a contingent of Marines as well. Tanker 6 once again leading the charge into the mostly residential, commercial sector of city, as the joint task force made their way towards their next objective. No good plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. This was a phrase that was well known even after a century. It was first uttered by Prussian General Helmuth Moltke. No matter how well or how much time is spent in planning an operation, there would always be that X factor that would totally unravel whatever plan was created. Thus was the situation Mitchell's ghosts found themselves in, as the G.I. Joe Ghost Recon operatives found themselves now encircled by a rather sizable Imperial force. Once the citadel was secured, the prisoners that were being held were released and assembled for immediate extraction. But that was when the first issue arose, as Ghosts soon realized there were much more persons being held than originally thought. A fact that was complicated more seeing that many of the prisoners were women and children as well. Apparently, Zorzel was not just content with arresting the political prisoners alone. This meant that evacuating the prisoners from the prison would take more time and would require more helicopters to do so. To add on to this unwanted complication, was the fact that no sooner had Ghosts radioed they had taken the citadel, a large number of Imperial soldiers suddenly appeared in the large square that was just outside the prison entrance. An area that was supposed to be the LZ point for the evac helicopters. The layout of the Imperial prison made it impossible for any rotary wing aircraft to land within the compound itself, and there was no way to safely evacuate the prisoners and their families safely from the rooftop. In short, Ghosts were trapped and although well armed, were not exactly equipped for a prolonged fight. There must have been at least 2,000 Imperial soldiers out there, many of whom wore wolfhide armor with purple robes. Obviously, these men were the elites, and unlike their fellow soldiers, were way more motivated. Meanwhile, outside of the prison, elements of the 1st Sateran Wolfhound Battalion stood in formation with their weapons drawn. Unlike the standard legionnaires had abandoned the prison, Wolfhound were cut from the same cloth as the Scorchiers. They were by far some of the more fanatical followers of Zorzel and would willingly follow his orders without a second thought. Which was really saying something when one considered just how fanatical the Scorchiers already were. Their orders now were to take the citadel and kill all the prisoners that were being held within its walls. Zorzel was not about to all these traitors to be rescued by their new masters. They all deserved to die, and the Wolfhound were more than happy to carry out the Emperor's orders. Yet as they waited outside the prison walls, they were completely unaware that the massive stone building was now under the control of the ANF. As far as they knew, the prison guards had gone rouge and taken the building for themselves. Why else would they have not opened the gates for the Emperor's elite unit? No matter, they will die too, like the traitors they were. Wolfhound waited for long minutes as their commander pondered his next course of action. Obviously they needed to retake the citadel from the traitors within, but just how to do it? The citadel was basically a small fortress that had been converted into a prison, meaning it was designed to withstand a prolonged siege. It would take time for them to bring in the weapons needed to retake the citadel, time they did not have. Each minute they stood idle, the barbarians were inching closer and closer to their location. But the Wolfhound could have never known just how close the ANF and their allies actually were. For suddenly, a black blur shot out from the darkness and soared over their heads. A childlike, almost sadistic laughter filled the cold morning air and sent unwanted shivers up the spines of all those who heard it, as a lone figure landed on top of the wall and twirled her axe above her head before placing it at her side. Rory Mercury. Rory the Reaper. Here, Emroy's girl. Lord Flare help us all. Hushed voices could be heard coming from the now stunned Imperial unit, a fact that was not lost on the raven-haired apostle, as she looked on at the soldiers standing before her. No, not soldiers, boys who acted like men with no honor. Rory knew just why these men were here and could sense that they were more than willing to carry out their orders. There was no place for individuals like themselves at Emroy's side in the afterlife. There was no place for anyone who would willingly slaughter innocent men, women and children, all in the name of a madman who was far too arrogant and monstrous for his own good. Rory almost felt pity for these men, as the demi-goddess knew just what awaited them once they died, but that feeling was short-lived. Even so, the much-feared apostle still felt as if Wolfhound deserved a chance at redemption for their intended actions. Maybe she was feeling generous. Maybe she just did not feel like killing hundreds of men today. Maybe she just wanted to try something different. Who knew, but Rory at least wanted to give these men a chance to walk away before she went into a frenzy. If you value your lives, you shall leave this place now and never return, the Apostle of Emroy said in a low, almost threatening voice, as she pointed her axe at the now frightened men below. Elite soldiers or not, the men of Wolfhound knew better than to challenge the infamous Rory Mercury. Almost immediately the men of Wolfhound dropped their weapons en masse, just as Tanker 6 and the rest of its task force rolled into the square and surrounded the now disarmed soldiers. Rory for her part, just huffed in disappointment as she saw Wolfhound surrender so easily to the other Werder soldiers and marines. Even if she had given them a chance to surrender, the demi-goddess did hope that at least a few of them would have been stupid enough to challenge her. By Emroy, this invasion was not the epic battle she had hoped it would be. But Rory had to admit that Atami and his people were far more cunning and innovative than any army she had encountered in the past. Eventually, ghosts emerged from the enemy prison with the recently liberated nobles and their families in tow. Many of whom were both shocked and surprised just how fast these other worlders were able to launch an assault on the imperial capital after Zorzel returned to Sidera. But were also thankful that the nightmare scenarios that had kept them awake many a night had not come to pass. Sidera had not been utterly destroyed by the might of the other worlder weapons. But they were also taken aback when they saw Rory Mercury herself interacting with the ANF soldiers afterwards. If these people had the Apostle of Emroy on their side, then they most certainly had the blessings of the gods themselves. If that were the case, then Zorzel most certainly didn't not stand a chance. By now, the second wave of the invasion was underway. As ANF transport helicopters flew into the capital carrying fresh troops within them. With the square now clear, Chinook and King Stallion helicopters touched down to deliver their compliments of Indonesian Marines who would now occupy the citadel and use it to hold captured Imperial personnel. They also had the extra duty of evacuating the liberated prisoners out of Sidera and transporting them to Italica where they would remain for the time being. As this was going on, Allied nations' forces had pushed further and further into the city, capturing key points and occupying entire districts with little resistance, as the Sateran garrisons had either been eliminated by the early morning airstrikes or had basically deserted their post. At one point, 1,000 Imperial soldiers attached to the Gaigest district garrison surrendered to just 50 Indian paratroopers after they had approached their barracks. The looks on their faces as they were rounded up by the Indian unit said it all. These men were broken, they had no will to fight. The ANF airstrikes and done their job brilliantly, as hundreds of Imperial soldiers and their commanders surrendered en masse all over the city. This had unintentionally caused a problem of securing so many prisoners on such a short notice. Many were marched back to the canals where they would be held until they could be transported out of the city. Others would be held in the warehouses that had been captured earlier in that day, while many more sat in the open under heavy guard. Still, this minor issue was not enough to slow the coalition advance as more and more districts fell into ANF hands. Despite the surprisingly quick advance of the Allied nations' forces and the utter collapse of the Sateran garrisons, Zorzal was still unwilling, if not unable, to admit that the war was truly over for the Empire. He had not heard anything from his commanders in the city, as none of the messengers the monarch had sent out had returned to the palace. Save for the small garrison of Scorchiers that now acted as his personal bodyguards, the self-proclaimed emperor had no control over the imperial military at that point, and as far as he knew, they were all that was left. Even the palace work staff had seemingly abandoned him as well, fleeing sometime during the night to avoid sharing the same fate as their would-be emperor. Many of the nobles and imperial officers that once sang his praises were now nowhere to be seen. Flair knows where those bastards disappeared to once the ANF began their assault. The throne room, once filled with his most loyal of supporters and advisors, was now only occupied by himself and his impromptu bodyguards. He was the emperor, damn it. This was not how it was supposed to go. It were to be the other worlders' cities that should have been burning before him, not his own. It were their armies that were supposed to break, not the Empire's. Blinded by his own arrogance, Zorzal silently cursed the gods and asked just what did he do to deserve such a cruel turn of events. Why was this happening to him now? But as much as he did not want to accept it, Zorzal had no choice but to admit to himself that at least for now, Sidera had lost. The other worlders were cutting deep into the old capital, and it was no doubt in his mind that they were heading towards the palace itself. As arrogant as he was, Zorzal had enough sense in him to realize the hopelessness in his current situation. But while he knew Sidera was lost, his war against the other worlders wasn't. True, Zorzal would be forced to flee, but only to rebuild his forces, so he could retake what was rightfully his. The monarch knew for a fact that there were several great noble houses in the east that would not hesitate to loan their armies to him. Particularly the house of Ha-Arkonnen, led by Rabban and Fade Rotha, who swore blood oath to kill Centurion, the house of Shaddam and the house of Carino. All of whom were historically devout subjects of the Sateran imperial family and were usually the first houses to rally their troops whenever the empire called upon them. It would not be difficult to rally the great houses of the eastern provinces to his cause. Especially House Ha-Arkonnen, whose members were the most fanatical and loyal to the empire. From them, he would grow a new army of the empire and retake the continent from those barbarians. It would take time, but Zorzal was determined to make the other worlders pay for their aggression. But first things first, he had to get out of Sidera and fast. Despite knowing what was going on, nothing could have prepared the Rose Order for what they had witnessed so far. As the sun rose above the now besieged city, Pina and her contingent of knights were both shocked and awed by the display of other worlders' might and ingenuity. ANF helicopters and other combat aircraft dominated the airspace above Sidera, as they flew confidently in the morning sky. The ungodly screeches of the jet engines and thumps of rotor blades shook the noble women to their very core, all the while trying not to lose control of their horses. The poor creatures were already spooked by the short battle that had taken place at the hills and beneath the walls of Sidera, and the unfamiliar noises now were certainly not helping in the slightest. Yet the knights and their Florida allies pressed onward into the city and assist where they could, whether it be guide coalition troops or even assist any civilians they found. Eventually, the two teams made it to the ANF lines where they were able to get some rest and, more importantly, a warm meal. But once again, the knights were in awe by the equipment the coalition had brought to bear on their city. Marine Corps Max Pros and ACVs now lined the cobbled stone streets at this particular checkpoint, as a pair of Japanese Humvees rolled past with red crosses painted on their side. In the nearby canal, a pair of river patrol boats with Japanese naval ensigns came up to a flight of stairs leading to the water edge and took on a group of soldiers, before powering off to some other unknown location of the city. A Japanese Type 60 motor gun carriage was parked not too far away with its crew loading the vehicle with more ammunition. But what really struck home for the noble women knights were the large groups of imperial soldiers that were now being held prisoner by the allied nations' forces. There was just so many of them. Yet upon talking to the prisoners and assuring them that they would not be harmed, Pina soon discovered that these men were in fact just conscripts drawn from the many villages surrounding the capital. These men and boys were not cut from the same cloth as traditional imperial soldiers, they were just normal citizens of the empire who had been forced to join the imperial army, by order of Zorzal himself. These were men who had not the training, nor the mental fortitude to be in any kind of a battle. These were genuinely scared men and boys who were being forced into battle against an enemy that not even the standard imperial army could defeat. What chance did they have? Probably the only thing that saved their lives, was the fact that the other worlders always seemed to show mercy towards those who had either been captured or, in the case of many of these men, surrendered. In hindsight, it was the best decision they could have made. It was also during this time that many of the knights were told about the fate of their respective families and were relieved to discover that many of them were indeed safe. But it was also a bittersweet moment as Pina realized that would have to inform the families of those knights, who's fallen in battle, that their daughters had been killed while fighting for the princess. The princess dreaded that inevitable meeting, but she had to focus on the current situation. Despite the apparent break in the fighting, Pina could tell that the other worlders were getting ready for one final push. There was no doubt in her mind of just where said push was being directed at, and Pina knew that both herself and her knights wanted to be a part of it. The Rose Order of Knights needed to be there, not only to avenge the deaths of their comrades, but to show that it was not the other worlders fighting against the Empire. The presence of the Rose Order would show the Satyran people that it was good finally triumphing over evil, and that the true enemy of Sandera was a madman who would destroy their nation. Or at least, that was what the knight believed anyway. Truth be told, she was quite unnerved by the entire situation, and for good reason. For in 1 week she had witnessed the surrender of the Satyran Empire, an assassination attempt on the Emperor himself, a coup led by Pina's sadistic brother, and now she had front row seats to what was quite possibly the death of Falmart's greatest civilization. Oh, what she would not have given to go back to the days before that blasted gate opened on Alnus Hill. But like it or not, here she was in a situation she could have never imagined in her wildest dreams. But as Princess and the Knights of the Rose Order pondered just what would be their next course of action, they were completely unaware of events that would soon take place within the Imperial Palace. A series of massive explosions signaled the beginning of the end of Zorzal's short-lived reign over Sandera, as many of the massive gateways that lead into the final tier of the Imperial capital were blown to Kingdom Come by the now advancing ANF forces. The few remaining garrisons that had stayed to fight off the invaders were no match for the combined multinational forces that now attacked them. As columns of American and Japanese armor charged through the new openings and quickly neutralized any and all resistance they encountered. Both Wolfhound and Scorcheers, units who attempted to stay and fight, were been mercilessly killed by the approaching ANF troops. But of course, Zorzal would not admit to defeat. Even as he prepared to flee the capital, the self-proclaimed emperor of the Satyran Empire believed that his forced retreat was only temporary. That he would soon return with a new army of the empire and take back what he believed to be rightfully his. But right now, his top priority was to escape the fallen city and avoid capture. Taking one last view from the balcony, the soon-to-be emperor in exile could see the other worlders' army snake its way through the streets and towards the palace itself. His blood boiled knowing this was the reality that was playing out for him at that moment. This was not supposed to happen. But he could not focus on the encroaching enemy right now. He had to get out of Sandera while he still could and make it to the eastern territories. Meanwhile, within the city itself, Tanker 6 and its crew pushed on unchallenged in the streets. Its turret swinging from side to side, as the ACV and its column of vehicles pressed forward towards the Imperial Palace itself. Rory Mercury stood confidently on top of the amphibious vehicles, as she had more or less become the unofficial mascot for the Joint Marine-Japanese Task Force. But despite her prominent position, the Apostle of Emroy was still rather disappointed that she had not yet fought anyone since entering Sandera itself. So much for being the mightiest army on the continent. The Satyran army now only existed in name and nothing more. Sandera itself was now slowly in process of being captured by an enemy army and there was no one left to defend it. The only ones who did attempt to put up a fight, were quickly and brutally cut down by the ANF weapons. Not quite a bad thing, as those men died proclaiming their devout loyalty to Emperor Zorzal as they attempted to charge the coalition forces. In a twisted way, only the right people were being killed in the battle for Sidera. Or at least that was what Rory thought, as she saw the dead, Scorchiers, and Wolfhound laying in the streets. The Apostle knew just what kind of a person Zorzel was, thanks to her talking to many an Imperial officer over the years. They painted a picture of a truly sadistic and egotistical individual who had no business leading men into battle, someone who valued his own status and self-worth over the lives of his own men. There were special places in Hardy's realm for persons like the former Crown Prince. Rory knew this as a fact. Men with no honor who used their arrogance to justify their horrific actions, and in Rory's mind, Zorzel was by far the worst. Anyone who were willing to sacrifice their lives for someone like that, most certainly did not have a place at Emroy's side after they died. If the situation were any different, she would have personally seen to it that Zorzel was given the type of death someone like him deserved. But despite her personal feeling towards the madman, Rory would allow the other worlders to have their way with the sadistic monarch. Eventually, Tanker 6 and its convoy came upon the entrance to the Imperial Palace itself, and to their surprise, it was surrounded by what was left of the Imperial military. Apart from the Wolfhound units and Imperial soldiers, elements of the Scorchiers could also be seen standing among their ranks as well. The men all stood together in formation, their swords drawn as the coalition troops approached the Imperial Palace itself. The ANF did not realize it at first, but this ragtag force made up what was left of the mighty Imperial army. A force that once made the continent tremble in fear, was now reduced to just a few hundred men guarding a palace in a capital they no longer controlled. And this was going to be their last stand. On the walls that surrounded the palace grounds itself, what was left of the Imperial Archer Corps stood ready with their bows in hand. They had a much better view of the approaching coalition troops, and unlike their comrades on the ground, the archers knew just what they would be faced with once the attack began. Not surprisingly, some of the more enlightened archers left their posts and fled. There was no one left to stop these acts of desertion. The only reason the rest stayed was because they quite literally had nothing else to lose at this point. For the remaining Imperials, it was better to die on their feet in one last act of defiance against the other worlders. As the first ANF vehicles came into view, the archers let loose with a cascade of arrows that took only a few seconds to reach their targets. But were completely ineffective, as their sharpened tips struck and bounced harmlessly off the metal hides of the armored vehicles they were supposed to kill. But this setback did little to diminish the resolve of the palace defenders, as with a mighty roar, Sidera Invicta, the surviving Scorchiers, and Wolfhound units charged towards the advancing army with either swords or battle axe in hand. Fire, barked Centurion, and all ANF forces, Florida troopers and Rory unleashed their weapons' destructive power, killing their opponents in brutal indifference. Zorzel watched on helplessly as his men were cut down by a hail of gunfire, as he stood on the balcony and watched the ill-fated battle take place. Those men were to hold off the other worlders long enough for him to make his escape, but they were easily pushed aside by the advancing ANF army and their horseless wagons. Inside the throne room, what was left of Zorzel's inner circle gathered with what little belongings they could carry. Only a handful of Scorchiers were left to act as the royals' personal bodyguards once they left the palace. The rest were either dead, or were preparing to meet the other Wolders once they entered the marble structure. These men just needed to hold off the barbarians long enough for their emperor to escape. With Zorzel at that moment, were legates Hondo Caldera and Kai del Repo of the Sidera city garrisons, both of whom had sworn their loyalty to the then crowned prince in Blackstone and were the only imperial officers to make it back to the palace. There was also Senator Durdurks and his wife, Lady Kuna Durdurks, both of whom managed to make it to the imperial palace before the first coalition troops entered the city. These individuals made up what was once known as the Sons of Sidera, a group with Zorzel himself. If they could escape and make it to the Eastern Territories, then they would form the base of a new imperial government that would eventually retake Sidera in the future. Both Dara and Repo were competent military commanders in their own right, while the House of Durdurks was a well-known family among the great houses of the Arrakis deserts due to their close ties to the House of Harkonnen and the spice trade as a whole. They would form the foundation for his new empire, but they would have to get out of Sidera first. A childlike laugh suddenly filled his ears, as Zorzel looked just in time to see the infamous Rory Mercury herself leap onto the palace walls and slaughter his men with glee, which made Zorzel's blood froze with fear. Zorzel feared no woman and saw them as nothing more than objects for him to use. But Rory Mercury, Rory the Reaper, she probably scared him a lot more than he would like to admit. "What's taking so long?" the royal yelled at his men, as they busily attempted to gather whatever documents and valuables they could from the throne room itself. "The other worlders are almost here." "Your Majesty," Legate Dara replied, "we have gathered as much of these imperial documents to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. And we may need them when we meet with the great houses of the Eastern Territories," Lord Dirdirx added, as he gathered the last of the imperial documents they would need. "Well, come on, hurry up," yelled Zorzel, as he rushed to the doors. "Follow me." "Charge!" yelled Centurion, "Yo Joe." The others repeated team's battle cry, as they stormed the palace. Only a few, scorch-ears, stood in their way, only to quickly dealt with by the machine gun fire. Soon, the Florida and ANF forces stormed the palace throne room, only to find it empty. "What the hell?" surprised Eric. "Where's Zorzel? He must be able to slip out of the palace, while we were storming the front entrance," said Atami. "Crap," cursed Duran, "this madman is more slippier than an eel." "But where he could go?" asked Williams. "The whole city has been blocked by our forces. There's no way he could slip through our triple encirclement ring." "Strike leader, this is STOROZH1, suddenly heard it in the radio. "Go ahead, STOROZH1, answered Centurion. "What is it?" "We've picked up several individuals on the ground, heading towards the ruins of Eastern Palace," said the KA-52 pilot. "They looked like several nobles and men in wolfhide armor." "It's Zorzel," gasped Pina. "He must be heading to the ruins of his palace." "But what for?" asked Atami. "He's gonna find a refuge in the ruins of his former home." "The escape way," shouted Tyul. "It must have been stayed intacted when Sir Prime's forces destroyed Zorzel's palace. It leads to the forests outside the city, where there must be horses staged for his escape." "Quickly, contact Mitchell," barked Centurion. "Have his ghosts proceed to those ruins right now. We must stop Zorzel from escaping. Come on." He stormed off the palace, following by the others. But as they reached the ruins of Zorzel's former home, they found Ghost Team, Hunter, nearby the steel door, with Kozik preparing to blow the door. "Sorry, sir," said Ferguson, saluting to Centurion, "but those rats were able to give us the slip. They've jumped into this hole and slammed the door shut more faster, before we can stop them." "Damn it," cursed Centurion, "by the time you guys blow the door open, he'll be far gone." "Well, that's just our luck. We captured the capital, defeated the entire enemy army, but Zorzel was able to slip through our fingers. That means, he's still free to reorganize some troops to make his one final strike." "But where would he go?" said Eric. "Certainly, he wouldn't go to Telta, he would find nothing there." "The eastern provinces," answered Pina. "There's houses of Corino, Shaddam and Ha Arkonen, who's still loyal to him. They might give him 8 their remaining legions. So that means, Zorzel still has one last card he could play," said Centurion. "Well, we'll need to worry about those forces later. Right now, we've got more important things to do. Ferguson, I want your team with Yaren and Wolf's teams to find out where this secret escape route leads to, then seal it for good. Meanwhile, we need to worry about Operation Exodus. It's time to evacuate the people of Falmart. Let's go." This is the end of part 23 of this What If. I hope you guys like it. Leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel to see more amazing contents.